Hello and welcome to our simulation of the Leaders Debate for the Canadian federal election of 2025, presented by CBC Radio Canada. My name is Vaish.
And I'm Joseph. Just to clarify before we start, this is a simulated debate for the academic purposes of the Politics and Media course. The views expressed are not representative of the university or the students within the simulation.
Let's get right into it and introduce our candidates. For the Liberal Party, we have Nicole Dumbell. Sitting right next to her is our Conservative Party leader, Megan Spiegel. Representing the New Democratic Party, Thomas Sanz. And then we have Sebastian Torres for the Green Party. Finally, Amelia Boyle representing the Bloc Québécois.
We would like to remind you of the rules of the debate. You must not interrupt others when speaking, and if you do, we will not hesitate to place you back on track.
Throughout this debate, you will speak about four of the most important topics for our voters. Starting, we'll talk about foreign affairs, including questions on the ongoing Israel and Gaza conflict, U.S. tariffs, and what Canadians should pay attention to outside their borders.
Next, we're going to ask about the climate change and energy. Canadians want to see political leaders tackle the climate crisis by prioritising renewable energy and the phasing out of fossil fuels.
Moving on to housing policy and affordability, where the emphasis is on the rising cost of housing and the youth's struggle to be able to settle down.
Ending on healthcare, we'll be discussing the devastating circumstances that the healthcare sector is facing. Healthcare professionals are fleeing the country, and stable healthcare is becoming scarce.
Everyone will get a chance to speak on every subject. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to answer their questions, and each open debate question will have 5 minutes where any of you can jump in to speak.
Lastly, we will conclude by asking each candidate why they're qualified to lead Canada in this upcoming term. They will have the opportunity to wrap up their stance in what we call the golden minute. And now we give the floor to you, our candidates, and get into our first question.
Our first topic will be foreign relations. For the sake of time, we'll be focusing on one topic, the Israel and Gaza conflict, and the elected Donald Trump and his proposed tariffs. First question to the Liberal Party. Your predecessor, Justin Trudeau, previously identified as a supporter of Israel. Would you describe your approach to Canada's relationship with Israel any differently? In light of recent developments in Gaza, do you believe Canada's current policies, such as the suspension of arms sales, is sufficient?
Our government has stopped sending military armament to Israel. And we want to return to a ceasefire and hopefully for a two-nation-state solution through conversations. Living side by side safely, secure, and with dignity is really important for us, especially those in Israel and Palestine. We believe Palestine deserves a seat at the table, and they should have a say in what their statehood is.
Thank you. Now for the Conservative Party. Your party has strongly supported Israel in the past. In light of the recent ceasefire violations in Gaza and growing international concern, do you believe Canada's support for Israel should continue this way? Are there scenarios in which Canada should place conditions on its diplomatic or military ties with Israel?
The Conservative Party will continue to support Israel through its endeavors against the terrorist group Hamas. We recognize that when it comes to the safety and security of your people, your family, your neighbors, that they deserve that support and protection in the same way that we would want that support should Canada be in that situation.
All right, thank you. Next, we have a question for the Bloc Québécois. Given your vision of Quebec sovereignty, if you were an independent state, what would your official position be? Would you be in favor of recognizing both states and the UN partition resolution? And would you recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
As Quebec, am I working? We can say this because we've actually already done it. We've passed motions in Parliament that recognize Palestine as a sovereign nation. We've worked together in terms of our response for sovereignty, and we've tried to push for Palestinian rights. As Quebec, we want our independence, and we respect every nation's quest for sovereignty. And so, yes, we believe that the Palestinians do have that right. We've backed that in Parliament. And additionally, we believe that Israel should have punitive measures against leaders that have committed war crimes. We support the Arab League in terms of getting an international peacekeeping organization to prevent these atrocities from happening. And in terms of the actual re-establishment of Palestine and Israel in that area, we hope that the Palestinians have that sovereignty to make the decisions for themselves. Canada's looked quite weak on a global scale, so we hope that we can support quests for sovereignty without interfering.
All right, thank you. Next, for the New Democratic Party. The New Democratic Party has called for stronger measures against Israel, including banning arms sales. Given Israel's continued attacks on Gaza despite international calls for a ceasefire, do you believe that Canada should go further and impose full economic sanctions or even cut diplomatic ties? What concrete steps would an NDP-led government take to hold Israel accountable?
First of all, any measure taken by Canada must begin with banning arms sales for the regime in Tel Aviv, not only until they end the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, but until they recognize the borders established in the 1948 UN Convention. If the Israeli government still refuses to enforce the human rights of the Palestinian people, Canada will not only have to take on economic measures, but we will have to recognize Palestine and cut all diplomatic ties with Israel. Maybe even taking up a vote in the UN to expel them from the assembly.
Thank you. And lastly, for the Green Party, the Greens have called for an immediate ceasefire in Israel, as well as an end to shipments of Canadian arms to the region. If the Green Party gets elected, would you stop the sale of arms straight away? And how would you balance your foreign policy objectives with your environmental goals?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, the Green Party in particular recognizes that we are in a world succumbing to threats on peace and security. And we want to first and foremost champion Canada's democracy. We condemn Trump's revocation of firearms, of aid to Ukraine, as well as in the Palestine-Israel conflict. We also condemn Trump's erosion of democratic institutions in the United States. We would like to use our platform to continue negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. In 2021, our members began lobbying the Canadian Foreign Minister to increase diplomatic pressure for a ceasefire and to create a humanitarian corridor on the Gaza Strip. We support divestment and sanctions on Israel as well. In 2020, we began supporting the application of sanctions on Israel, similar to those applied to Russia in 2014 after their annexation of Crimea. By advocating for a more democratic world, first and foremost, we hope to continue our work championing environmental stewardship as well.
Thank you. Now let's move on to the open debate. As a reminder, you have 5 minutes amongst yourselves to answer this question. Anyone can jump in, but we urge you to stay respectful and don't interrupt. If you get off topic, we'll move on to the next speaker. The question is, given the impact of U.S. tariffs, how does your party plan to protect Canada's economic interests, including key industries and jobs, while balancing trade relations with our largest partner? What measures would you implement to minimize effects on consumers and supply chains? And how would you incorporate sustainability and regional considerations into your strategy? The floor is open.
I can start. So Canada and the ties with the U.S., especially with the tariffs increasing, has definitely worsened. And we need to strengthen the Canadian economy and making our communities more resilient by focusing on buying Canadian-owned companies and products. And we need to reduce our dependence on the U.S. economy and the U.S. in general. We need to put retaliatory tariffs on steel and aluminum that we import or export to the U.S. And we need to be serious about pushing back against Trump and what he plans on doing with the economy that might affect Canada.
The Conservative Party heavily agrees on the basis of bringing back Canadian goods, and we recognize that we need to fight back against these tariffs and that dependence as well, focusing on implementing tariffs back as a response. But beyond that, we can work in regards to other economic institutions around the world than just the United States in order to better our economy for the objects that we rely on the U.S. for.
Canada must realize that it's been having a golden opportunity to transform its economy into a better, fairer, and greener economy. We must take this chance to join forces with the European Union and other more liberal economies, not only to strengthen the Canadian economy and Canadian markets, but to improve the living standards of every single Canadian.
What concerns me about the idea that these other parties are discussing of a retaliatory tariff measure is the idea of risking a trade war with one of our strongest economic partners. What we propose is, instead of retaliating with stronger tariffs, is strengthening our trade partnerships with the EU and Australia in particular. By creating a sort of economic NATO of sorts, we kind of insulate ourselves from the interests of a dominating from a dominating U.S. government. We also would like to consider suspending the third-party agreement with the United States, which means we would work individually with provinces to build infrastructure to screen, process, and dispatch new arrivals from the United States, especially in the job markets that have high vacancies. This will increase job markets and hopefully build up our economic prowess.
Ladies and gentlemen, and specifically my Quebec viewers listening, the governments have told us that they want to diversify our industries and put Canada first, and yet they are funneling Quebec as a bargaining chip against the US. Our industries are under threat. Our economic, our hydroelectricity, our agriculture is under threat because the Liberal parties are using us as a chip in order to get what they want. As Quebec, we think we have the power to run our own industries. We've created partnerships with California and other local partners in North America. We've got connections to France, and we need to diversify our industries without using one of our biggest sectors of Canada as a bargaining chip. And how the parties here today plan to do that without sacrificing Quebec interests, I'm not aware that they are able to do that.
In these trying times, it's important for the honorable member of Quebec to understand that Canada will fall if it is not united in a common front. As the American President Lincoln said, a house divided upon itself cannot stand. If Quebec seeks its own destiny, it will very much benefit, but it will have to sacrifice the rest of Canada to survive.
Unfortunately, Canada also has to consider that Quebec holds the major economic output within Canada. We are responsible for 70% of clean energies. We have major agricultural exports to the US. We export over 100 billion from Quebec alone to the US, and just to the US. So if you put Quebecan interests at risk in terms of trying to unify Canada as a whole, you risk putting your major economic export at risk, which is Quebec.
There's still time remaining. Any response at all?
We're already in a trade war. The American presidency has already decided that it's unilaterally going to impose tariffs on all its economic power partners. Quebec is not going to find itself in the good graces of Washington just because it wishes to. If Quebec wishes to continue exporting to the US, it will have to wait until a Canadian free trade agreement is reached with the US, not before.
We understand that. We just don't think that Quebec should be used as a bargaining chip in which our industries are hurting more proportionally compared to other Canadian industries. We think that obviously Canada as a whole is suffering. Why should Quebec suffer more? Because we export more, because we have extremely valuable industries to the whole of Canada, and the other parties fail to address the needs of the biggest province within Canada.
Okay, we'll be hearing from the Conservative Party.
Why limit yourself? I mean, the Conservative Party, we are looking to, yes, retaliate, but also exploring other options of where to export. Why limit your exports to simply America when you could further the expansion with Canada as a whole to other countries and other economies, therefore enriching Quebec and not having to worry about simply relying on the US for your exports?
We agree. We've supported diversification in the past. We've created partnerships with industries all over. For example, in China, we have regional partnerships just from Quebec to provinces in China. We just don't think as a whole in Canada's negotiations with the US and with partners that they should use Quebec as a bargaining chip. So yes, we support diversification, just not at the risk of Quebecan industries. So yeah.
Thank you. So moving on to the next section. Thank you, candidates, for your insights. We'll move on to our next topic, climate change and energy. Our questions will be focused on renewable energy versus fossil fuels to combat the ongoing climate crisis. First question for the Liberals. What is your take on continuing to privilege just investment in renewable energy? How will your party's policies, preferences relate to Justin Trudeau's ambitious programme of climate action over his term in office?
So it's no longer just an environmental issue, but it's economic survival. We are creating more green jobs and clean technologies, which gives Canada the opportunity to be a leader in the global scale in this sector when it comes to climate policies. We have created the first comprehensive climate legislation for long-term goals. So not just looking at the small picture, but the bigger picture and zooming out. We have regulations to limit the pollutions for the oil and gas sectors that are the biggest producers of pollution. We have created more Sustainable Job Act to protect the economy, which is important to when looking at the whole picture of climate change, because it's not just the environment, but economics. And then we have the National Strategy Respecting the Environmental Racism and Environmental Justice Act, which focuses on, encompasses everything. So that's kind of where we're heading at, is looking at the big picture of climate change in Canada.
Thank you. Next for the Conservative candidate. You always consistently defend Canadian companies, and you do the same with oil companies. Do you plan to intervene to prevent air pollution due to oil extraction? Do you think they should be subsidized with the public's money?
So the Conservative Party does continue to support the expansion of oil exports as they're a strong part of the Canadian economy. And additionally, we don't believe that renewable energy is an overnight process. We support providing incentives for these companies, the private oil companies, to better explore various forms of energy, including LNG pipelines, which have 40% less emissions than gas. But since it's not overnight, we want to allow those in those areas to continue to have workers with jobs and to continue to support them in the best way that we can, while also taking that slow shift to renewable energy.
Thank you. Next for the Bloc Québécois, how do you plan to maintain your energy efficiency if your policies oppose oil and gas exploitation in Quebec?
We have actually done substantially more than the rest of Canada when it comes to renewable energies. The other parties will tell you, specifically the Liberal and Conservative parties, that they care about the future of Canada and the production of clean energy. And yet, they simultaneously fund $18 billion annually to the fossil fuel industries. Now that is hypocrisy at its finest. Here in Quebec, we are transforming our industries with over 70% of our energy coming from renewables, specifically hydro, and we've only continued this. We think the way that we have to do it is to stop funding these fossil fuel companies and to reallocate that money into clean energy, creating jobs, sustainable jobs within clean energy, which we have done through our hydro programs, which power 70% of Quebec.
Thank you. For the NDP has advocated for a just transition to a greener economy. How would your government balance investment in renewable energy with the gradual phase out of oil and gas projects whilst ensuring jobs for workers in the sector?
The oil and gas crisis is not only a crisis for all Canadians, it will likely be a local crisis for Middle Canada, for the middle provinces. And it's clear that the NDP has to cut the subsidies that sustain the oil and gas companies in those regions, while ensuring that those funds go into funding the transformation of those industries and the retraining of those workers so that they can join a greener Canadian economy. However, it is important that we rapidly transition into greener energy, not only because of the looming climate catastrophe, which will threaten most of the coastal provinces, but because of the danger it poses for all humanity.
Thank you. And finally, for the Greens, would you consider banning fossil fuels like oil and gas exports? Which other sources of energy and external investment would you consider, taking into account that oil and gas exportation accounts for 2.8% of the national economy's GDP?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, we want to shift the narrative away from an immediate ban on fossil fuels and oil and gas in particular. Instead, we're committed to phasing out fossil fuels. A sudden ban, we understand, will disrupt the economy severely. What we propose is a gradual transition into being the leader in the world in renewable energy production and exportation. The 2.8% of oil and gas that comprises our GDP is a bit misleading, as the world continues to shift more and more towards using renewable and clean energy. What we plan is a planned transition that expands the renewable energy sector, clean technology, and green jobs that will surpass oil and gas contributions to the economy. We support the carbon rebate, in which case we defend the carbon tax, which we use as a tool against fighting climate change but also as a means for redistributing wealth. We also plan on cutting emissions. We're committed to upholding the Paris Agreement. We're looking to phase out fossil fuels is what I want to emphasize first and foremost. We want to invest in green energy projects like a national electrical power grid. We want to phase out bitumen production by 2030 and 2035. We also plan to reduce oil and gas production to 8% of its current rate in 2050, while also banning fracking.
Thank you. Moving on to our open debate, we would like to bring up the Paris Climate Agreement and hear your thoughts. After the recent US exit from the Paris Climate Agreement, many countries have thought of doing the same, claiming it's unfair. Since the US is Canada's largest trading partner, this affects the economy and global supply chain. Our question is, how will Canada, under your administration, balance its climate commitments with economic interests, especially in oil and gas and the manufacturing sectors, in light of the US pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement? Should Canada pursue stronger domestic climate policies or adapt to the US shift?
If Canada wants to lead the green revolution, it has to lead it by example. We are a country blessed with natural resources and with great opportunities that sustain renewable energy. We have extensive areas where we can place solar farms. We have a great availability of wind resources. We have wave resources as well. And we could even reinforce the green energy with nuclear power, even though that's controversial. Even though the US has pulled out of the agreement, Canada must remain in it if it wants to make the world a better place.
I think if we're using the United States as our benchmark for the decisions we make, then we really have to reevaluate how we want to proceed as Canadian citizens. I think that remaining in the Paris Agreement actually would be more beneficial for our economy. We touched on earlier that the portion of our GDP that is comprised of oil and gas is misleading as the world continues to transition towards more renewable energy sources, such as wind, solar, and planning a transition that would not necessarily halt our emissions, but gradually shift us out of them by 2050 would ultimately be the most beneficial for our economy.
And since climate change is very decisive, or not decisive, but a hot topic in the global right now because people deny it. Like our allies in the US, they don't believe that it's real, but it is. And we in Canada have the opportunity to stand up and be a figure. And so by staying in the Paris Agreement, we are showing that we believe that this is a true issue, and those that want to work with us when it comes to the economy and creating more trade is important to show that we are a leader in this, because it's two-sided.
Even if the US on a federal level has left the Paris Agreement, we still have found major economic opportunities within the green industry with exports into the US. So Quebec, for example, has a $100 million trade deal with California, for example, in which we trade hydro materials, and we have this green deal with California. So there still are economic interests within climate leadership with trade with the US. Even if they've left the Paris Agreement, we can still find these economic activities. So to pull out of this agreement would be to annex us from the rest of our allies internationally.
The Conservative Party agrees in staying in the Paris Climate Agreement. We have no intention on thinking that we should leave it at all. And frankly, there's no reason for us to follow in the footsteps of the United States, as we are our own nation that is determining and can make these changes and factors on our own. And we support the slow change through incentivizing for the various private companies that work within Canada.
I find a little bit of an issue with you saying your emphasis on the privatization of companies and private sectors in terms of renewable energy, as it's these companies and these big corporations that are proliferating the problem of climate change and their lack thereof. What I find with the Conservative platform is that they undermine the idea of a carbon tax, for example. They believe that the carbon tax escalates the problem economically for Canadians. We believe that the carbon tax is essential for not only curbing emissions, but also redistributing wealth. So I ask you, do you guys have an alternative to your idea of privatizing resources towards these private companies that are only proliferating the problem of climate change?
Well, that's the idea of an incentive. First off, we don't support the carbon tax because it's the ones hitting the middle Americans. They're the ones paying it. I mean, thinking that they're not getting affected by it is the same way that Donald Trump thinks that tariffs work. It's the companies that pay it, right? But these middle Americans are getting affected, and we believe that they need to be aided with. So we are anti the carbon tax for that reason. As it comes to incentivizing with privatized companies, we believe that it's best to work with them, not against them. We can all go together to move it, and you should reward, not punish.
The economic incentive is not in favor of the green transition. The government must step first and plan out the transition and force companies to take part in it. It's ridiculous that the Conservative Party thinks it can encourage companies to develop green energy. Even the Liberal Party has struggled to properly follow on upon the green transition. It's ridiculous to think that anyone but the government can take this challenge on.
Well, the Liberal Party has taken off the carbon tax for individuals and individual households throughout Canada. We've implemented taxes on the larger oil and gas companies because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are creating the most pollution. We have put into place some policies that reduce the methane as well. We need to strengthen those regulations and support the innovative technologies surrounding methane capture. And some of that is working with the northern communities that are heavily impacted by these climate change issues. And so, while yes, taking away the carbon tax on residential might be seen as controversial, they're not the biggest issue. The biggest issue comes with the gas and oil industries.
All right, thank you. Thank you for all your perspectives. Next, we'll be discussing housing policy and the affordability crisis. For the Liberal Party, given that the Liberal Party has been in power for nearly a decade and housing affordability has only worsened, why should Canadians trust that your new promise to build nearly 500,000 homes per year will succeed where previous policies have fallen short? What concrete measures will you implement to ensure this plan delivers real results?
So the Canadian government has stepped back from building houses, and that is an error on our part, and we need to take accountability for that. But we need to take action to get back on track, and that comes with doubling the home construction to 500,000 new homes a year, unlocking private investments, modernizing construction technologies, and fast-tracking skilled trade training, because at the end of the day, they're the ones building these homes, and if we can improve their experiences, we can get these houses built rapidly, while also maintaining sustainability. We have eliminated the GST for first-time home buyers, for houses under $1 million. And we want to double community living with co-ops and nonprofits. So we have a lot of new ideas, and while we struggled the past couple years, we recognize this, and we're taking accountability, and we're moving forward.
Thank you. For the Conservative Party, from the first quarter of 2014 to the first quarter of 2022, house prices in nominal terms have soared 116% in Canada, according to BIS data. Canada needs about 3.5 million additional housing units by 2030 to restore affordability. Do you plan to intervene in the housing production, or should they rely on supply from companies and builders?
So we believe, the Conservative Party, that there is a balance of it being both. So we want to move forward with our Build Homes, Not Bureaucracy Act, which would help to reduce all the barriers that it takes to move forward with creating new units. So by allowing that, we can get a faster production of housing, thus making it more attainable for people to be a part of that. And beyond that, when it comes to more of the private sector, we also do believe in reducing taxes for the creation of it. So on the front end, for new buyers or new renters, those prices are going to be lower because they won't have to be paid in general.
Thank you. For the Bloc Québécois has repeatedly emphasized the need for increased investment in housing for Indigenous communities. How does your party propose to reform the home ownership system to make housing more accessible and better suited for the needs for the vulnerable and marginalized groups?
Definitely. So in Quebec, we are home to 10 Indigenous groups, and they play a major part in forming our unique culture. But unfortunately, the housing is just inadequate. Not only do we have high homelessness rates across Canada, but Indigenous homes, especially in Indigenous communities, are outdated, unsafe, or just non-existent. And this is a supply and demand issue as well as a renovation issue. So we propose the reallocation of $4.3 billion towards the remodeling, reconstruction, and production of homes for Indigenous communities in order to make their communities more safer, their homes more safer, removing asbestos. Additionally, we believe in allocating money towards social housing and to address one of the main causes of the rental crisis within Canada, which is private investors. We think that if we put in a scheme to address, like to tax private investors in line with like a first home buyer's guarantee, that we can address and reduce some of the private investment, leaving the homes for ordinary Canadians who are more at risk to homelessness or housing insecurity. But yeah, so we think we need to reallocate our money, work more on providing social housing and safer housing so that all Canadians can access their right for affordable housing.
All right, thank you so much. Next, for the NDP, your party has long called for an ambitious plan to construct public and affordable housing. What concrete steps will your party take to tackle barriers such as construction costs and labor shortages to ensure that new housing can be built quickly and affordably?
Clearly, the main Canadian cities are highly expensive, and we need to alleviate those costs. Thus, the NDP strives to construct massive new infrastructure and house building projects in the main Canadian cities. It is clear that we will have to find a lot of costs, but we believe that by cutting the subsidies for oil and gas, we can finance these projects while still remaining in the black, without reaching a deficit. But we also believe that the main issue isn't necessarily the availability of housing, it's the cost. It's that a lot of housing is used for short-term rentals, Airbnbs, etc. And we will also be tackling that.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, for the Greens, given that your party views the housing and homelessness situation as a national crisis, should it take priority over climate policies? And what are your proposals?
With two emergencies, we unfortunately do not have the luxury of placing priority over one or the other. Housing, as we all know, is a human right, and today it's being treated like a stock market. Families cannot keep up with the rising housing costs, and big companies continue to buy homes with no government intervention. Our plan is to set rules first and foremost on the meaning of affordability for housing. We plan to strengthen the housing market regulations and get government back into the business of building houses. Now, to tackle the issue of homelessness, we understand that homelessness and housing are twin crises that go hand in hand. We look to strengthen the limitations on foreign investment in housing first and foremost. We want to end predatory practices in real estate, as well as closing real estate investment trusts to close tax haven loopholes. To address the issue of homelessness, especially post-pandemic, it's incredibly important that we take a dynamic approach. We want to expand the Rapid Housing Initiative, which will streamline funding for housing. We want to invest in building over 50,000 more supportive housing units over time. The national moratorium on pandemic evictions that we've been lobbying for with Parliament will also end evictions to combat homelessness in a post-pandemic era.
Thank you. For our open debate question, we'll be focusing on the future for the youth of Canada. Should the government offer tax breaks or direct initiatives to help the Canadian youth overcome financial barriers to first-time home ownership, or focus on incentivizing developers to build more affordable housing? You have 5 minutes.
We can't choose one over the other. They're both extremely important. And we need to do both of them. So part of it is rapidly expanding access to supplies and building, and then creating stronger incentives for developers. So maybe that's a credit or a tax credit, whatever. But then also cutting unnecessary fees when it comes to building these new model homes. We have to make sure everyone is in the picture, and we have to take a look at every single angle and make sure we cover as much ground as possible. And for the Liberal Party, that means we have to attack both at the same time.
If we could trust the private sector to have the incentives of solving this crisis, they would have already. The government must take the responsibility itself and create and solve the housing crisis itself. We must create more public housing, not only in the big cities, but also in middle Canada, so that no Canadian gets left behind. And we can also incentivize the free market to do it, but it cannot be our main solution. The Canadian government and the provincial governments must take it as their responsibility to tackle this crisis head on.
You go.
Thank you. The Conservative Party is supportive of the removal of certain GST taxes, especially for when it comes to first home buyers, and we want to expand the financial threshold for that. So originally set at $450,000 on the house, we want to expand that to $1.2 million for first home buyers to reduce that GST tax. Furthering that, we also want to, when it comes to just the housing crisis in general, we want to place more faith in our municipalities and our provinces. So allowing the funding to go to them as they continue to solve the problems in their area, because certain things just happening in one province aren't equivocal exactly to what's happening in a different area. And we think that those provinces and municipalities will know how best to handle that situation for their group of people, and we can adjust the funding from the Housing Accelerating Fund based on that.
Obviously, the Bloc Québécois agrees with that, in that the state should have their sovereignty to address the housing crises how they see fit. We see this issue as twofold. Not only are there not enough houses, but too many of these houses are going to private investors who keep them empty, or are foreign investors looking to get into the Canadian market, opening them up to Airbnbs. So this is a twofold issue that isn't just going to be solved by choosing one or the other. We have to look holistically. And so that comes through supporting industries that develop housing whilst also removing barriers for first-time owners, and at the same time simultaneously increasing the barriers for private investors to become massive landlords owning thousands of properties, which we see happen all over Canada. If private investors are making these properties unavailable for Canadians, it's driving the costs up, it's leaving it to the hands of these investors to determine the market rates, and it's making it unaffordable for Canadians, specifically Canadian youth, to access these houses. So we have to look at this issue holistically, and the Bloc Québécois does not propose going solely one way or the other. We think we have to look at it holistically.
I'm sensing a common theme that the framework that each party supports supports the idea of more houses. That's very easy to say, but there's not a lot of solution and practicality in some of the situations that are occurring. Specifically, the Liberal Party, I'm hearing, relies on incentives for developers and buyers and mild regulations to avoid providing direct public housing. This essentially is treating housing as an asset, not a fundamental human right, like the Green Party sees. What we need to be doing is instead expanding our rapid housing initiatives in order to streamline funding for housing projects. We plan on doing this and by creating 50,000 more homes by allocating these funds and streamlining this process. We also find that a big issue with homeowners and first-time buyers post-pandemic was the idea of unemployment. And we plan, like I said before, on a national moratorium that alleviates a little bit of the pressure of pandemic-related evictions to combat the idea of homelessness and to encourage first-time buyers in the housing market.
I agree with my colleague from Quebec that the housing crisis is not a single issue, but she has to understand that neither the provinces nor the federal government can solely be the ones to solve this problem. We must work together, not as provinces, but as a nation, to solve the crisis for all Canadians.
We think that because the housing crisis looks so different in the different territories and provinces, it only makes sense for us to deal with it how we see fit. Like Quebec has the 35th largest GDP per capita in the world, and we are giving these funds to other areas where it's not being dealt with properly. Whereas if we had the sovereignty within ourselves to develop Quebec even further how we see fit, we believe that we could address this a lot quicker and a lot more effectively than if we worked on it as a global issue. Like, this is a human right. Sorting it out as quick as possible and as effectively as possible is mandatory. And we believe that by giving power to the individual provinces, which have the local knowledge, can partner with local businesses, it can be dealt with more effectively.
If we allow this issue to be broken up individually between the provinces, we will never see systemic change and overall change within our own government. While I do agree to some extent that housing is different based on the province, I don't believe that we necessarily should be allowing each province to do what they want with federal funds especially. Like I mentioned before, we cannot prioritize housing and homelessness over one another.
Thank you very much. Moving on, please. So, for our last topic of discussion, we'll be going over the stabilisation of our nation's healthcare system. First, for the Liberals, healthcare in Canada has indeed been performing comparatively well, but rural areas still have difficult access to this essential service. In the Canada Health Act of 1984, it promises to facilitate reasonable access to health services without financial or other barriers. What guarantees do citizens have that they will deliver on this after 12 long years?
Everyone deserves equitable access to healthcare. And part of that is modernizing rural clinics, so going in and making sure that they're up to date with the best technologies, having healthcare professionals in more remote communities, and then expanding virtual services are three big ways moving forward we can expand healthcare. And we also have to have sustained investment and coordination and accountability. We need to make sure everyone is being held accountable within the healthcare workforce. And making sure that primary care services are the first point of contact for any Canadian citizen and not straight to the emergency room where they're busy and crowded and overworked. So slowly but surely modernizing the clinics that don't get as much attention because they need just as much attention.
Thank you. For the Conservatives, according to the Canadian Health Coalition, your party states that it wants to increase provincial funding through the Canada Health Transfer. But you've also made it clear that these funds will not be marked specifically for healthcare spending. With the rise of privatised healthcare, how can Canadians be so assured that this approach will not weaken public healthcare, especially when there's no guarantee the funds will not be redirected to other areas?
Well, part of what goes in with that $60 million going out is the Canadian Health Act, and they work hand in hand in the limitations of how it can be spended. But beyond that, we want to increase how fast and how quickly the different provinces can work towards the immediate health issues that concern their people. So reducing this allows for more freedom in these provinces, and reducing the bureaucratic barriers, they can take action much faster than if there's a lengthy process of, I have to go through this group, and we have to continue to work our way up to a decision. By then, the people have suffered long enough. So it's important that these provinces get the opportunity to make these faster working decisions for their people as the issues change by the province, and who better than the local people to help those people in their health.
Thank you. Now for the Bloc Québécois. If the Bloc Québécois were elected and prioritised Quebec's healthcare funding needs, how can Canadians in other parts of Canada trust that they will receive equal healthcare funding and treatment?
Bloc Québécois' mandate is essentially that the provinces within Canada should have that power to see as they do fit. So in line sort of with what the Conservative Party said, we think that the states can deal with what they see best by doing what's right for them. So for example, as Quebec, we spend over 30% of our budget on healthcare, which is significantly higher than the other provinces. We support increasing the Canada Transfer Act to 35%, and that means that the different provinces around Canada will have 35% of the funding to go towards their healthcare systems. Additionally, we believe that healthcare within Canada is flawed as a concept. It needs systematic changes. Our pharmaceuticals, for example, we compare our pharmaceutical prices with a baseline to the United States rather than a global. So it means that our drug costs for the individual consumer are extraordinarily high compared to what they should be and what other developed countries are getting them for. As Quebec, we support the lowering of drug costs through the removal of comparisons to the US. We think that we need a reform of our budgets and to prioritize the healthcare, specifically focusing on rural access and the development of our system.
Thank you. Next, for the NDP. The NDP has long advocated for the expansion of public healthcare, including dental, pharmacare, and also mental health care. How will your party fund these expansions without increasing the cost on the working Canadians?
As I've said before in the housing questions, we intend to cut subsidies on oil and gas. We all intend to use those funds, which are astronomically high, to fund an array of projects, from housing to healthcare. Why we want to expand this is because healthcare is a human right. I doubt I'll find much argument here. Either we ensure healthcare in Canada, or we're failing as a nation. The healthcare system is our pride and joy. It's a pride of Canadians that we have a socialized healthcare system. If we look at our southern neighbors, they suffer under a privatized system. And it's crucial that Canadians keep their public system public so that Canadian healthcare is in the hands of Canadians. Thank you.
Finally, for the Greens. The Greens Party also supports expanding public healthcare, including dental, pharmacare, and mental health care services again. How does your party plan to fund these initiatives in a fiscally responsible way, whilst ensuring the financial burden does not fall disproportionately on middle class and working Canadians?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, healthcare is, like mentioned by my NDP colleague, is a universal right. It's a Canadian value that we've championed long before. Yet millions are lacking a family doctor. Seniors struggle with the cost of pharmacare and Medicare. And for-profit corporations are dominating the interest of the healthcare sector. We aim to strengthen public healthcare for a timely and necessary care patients. We aim to strengthen universal healthcare and pharmacare, which means that Canadians will pay less out of pocket for these drugs and pricing. We also look to enhance the Canada Health Act to ensure that federal dollars don't go directly into public health, and we aim to publicize these funds. And you asked, how do we plan on paying for these? We plan on paying with a fair and progressive taxation, a wealth tax on the 1%, so that middle class and lower class Canadians will not be disproportionately affected. We also aim to close corporate tax loopholes. We want to reduce the care costs and bulk drug purchasing by bigger corporations, which will drive costs down for middle class Canadians. The healthcare workforce crisis is another major issue, and we plan on increasing federal healthcare transfers, which increases the wages and improves the working conditions of healthcare workers around Canada. This will strengthen public and not-for-profit services.
Thank you. Finally, our last open debate question is in regards to the current healthcare crisis. Workforce crisis, sorry. Since 2013, there has been a 25% increase in nurses leaving the profession before the age of 35. And in 2022, 69% of doctors said they were considering leaving the country. These figures surely reflect deeper unresolved issues, poor wages, unsafe working conditions, overwhelming workloads, and widespread mental health struggles. If elected, what specific immediate actions will your party take to address the root causes of this crisis and rebuild a sustainable workforce again?
The Conservative Party is looking to implement what we would call the Blue Steel Standard. And what this would do is this would allow for an increase in physicians and workers to help reduce the load and bearings that our current doctors and physicians have. And it would take those that have come in or received their medical education from outside of Canada would be able to take a standardized test showing that they're competent and capable of taking on the health issues of being a family doctor or working in a hospital. And this would increase the workforce, allowing us to help reduce these conditions and these issues. And in addition, with our 100 million that we would want to, or the increase of 60 million in spending for provinces, they would then decide to be able to help reduce those pay gaps or increasing on any sort of healthcare that our own physicians need regarding mental health and such.
This is an issue of brain drain. Canadians are seeing opportunities in the South, in other countries where the conditions are better. And so not only can we say we propose solutions, we've already done it. Quebec's already implemented several measures in order to improve the lives of our physicians and primary care workers. That includes increasing the pay through our Canada Transfer Act and increasing our proportional budget towards healthcare. And it also focuses on making it an enjoyable place to work. We focus on reducing the amount of long hours. Canadian doctors are working 15 hours, 20 hours without breaks. This is unacceptable. And so Quebec, we're not just saying that we're going to stop it. We've already done that. We've put in things such as longer paid maternity leaves, and other conditions that make it more desirable for Canadians to actually stay in Canada, which at the end of the day, we want Canadians to want to work in Canada. So,
While I agree with my colleague from Quebec, I think the main cause for the issues in our healthcare system are the Liberal and Conservative governments who have, for years now, ignored the pay necessities of our healthcare professionals. Not only do we need more doctors to not only alleviate issues in the big metropolitan areas, we need more doctors in Middle Canada, in the prairie provinces, in the Northern Territories. This isn't only an issue of overcrowding, it's an issue of ignoring the middle of Canada. And we need further economic incentives for healthcare professionals, which the Liberal and Conservative parties have time after time refused to admit to.
Healthcare workers are the true heroes of Canada. However, they're overworked and underpaid, and they have major burnout. And so this is clearly an issue we need to tackle head on. So the Liberal Party wants to invest in healthcare worker recruitment and retention to make sure these individuals are staying in their jobs longer because they want to, not because they feel forced to. And part of that is increasing wages. But also, we want to increase access to mental health help, reduce substance use, as well as lowering the stigma that follows mental health as well, making sure that the healthcare workers have access to everything. And like my colleague said, part of the issue as well is the satellite and the smaller healthcare facilities. So modernizing them, making sure that they're well connected to the bigger facilities, adopting common standards and policies to health data, and making sure everyone is on the same level, and making sure everyone has access to the same information, and digital tools. And like Justin Trudeau, my predecessor, said, look out for everyone and leave out no one. Incorporate everyone. This is a Canadian-wide issue. It's a whole, like, as a country, it's an issue we need to tackle head on.
What concerns me a bit is hearing how much there is about provincial support and dividing the healthcare sector up to the discretion of the different provinces of Canada. Once I've said it before and I'll say it again, this is a systemic issue. And another issue that I'm consistently hearing is how these initiatives are going to be funded. For the Green Party, we've decided that if elected, we will champion mental health as well as sexual health and reproductive health by diverting our $18 million investment into the expansion of the Canada Health Act. This will aid us in providing universal access to no-cost contraceptives nationwide. We're not focusing here on one particular region that might have a stronger economy than another. This is a systemic issue that must be tackled and handled as such. We will also tackle the mental health crisis that is plaguing our nation. By increasing school mental health counselors and beefing up mental health programs for primary care patients, we will tackle this situation and handle this accordingly.
the Bloc Québécois has a question to ask the Green Party. So you've stated that you think that healthcare should be focused on all of Canada, for example, not in the hands of the provinces. But currently the provinces do have that power to discretion their own healthcare. Do you see your proposals in terms of taking away power from the provinces and leading it more into the hands of the states? So are you taking away power from the individual provinces?
I don't think anyone plans on taking power away or dispowering people. If you look around Canada right now, I mentioned earlier, millions are lacking a family doctor. Families are struggling. Seniors struggle to cover the costs of pharmacare and Medicare. What we aim to do is reallocate our investment into federal funds, like the Canada Health Act, to empower each state and provide equity and equality among the states. What I'm hearing more and more is championing of singular provincial support, and that can no longer be the case. We will have delayed reaction times like other nations did that require a federalist system with large pandemics like COVID-19. This will be an increasingly pertinent issue should we allow states to have their own discretion over healthcare, the healthcare sector.
I believe the language of my Québécois colleague is quite dangerous because it is suggesting that should she be empowered, she would leave Canadians behind. She would prioritize just one province or the larger provinces and leave the middle provinces without the resources they need to ensure the health of their citizens.
The crux of who we are as a party is to give the power to who can deal with it best. And so as Bloc Québécois, we don't believe in removing healthcare for our provinces in Nova Scotia and other areas of Canada. We believe that they know themselves best, and therefore, in line with these overall federal measurements, they should have the power to allocate these funds to deal with the issues that their province uniquely faces. Canada, by mass, is the second largest country, so we can't expect necessarily for someone on the opposite side of Canada to be able to know what an Indigenous person in the top of British Columbia will be dealing with.
All right, thank you to our candidates for their thoughtful discourse thus far. Now that we've heard your positions on key issues facing the country, we now ask each of you to give us a 1-minute pitch on why you are qualified to lead Canada in this upcoming term. Why should we, the public, choose you? Starting with the Liberal Party.
We have faced many problems, but we are planning on tackling these problems with a fresh pair of eyes. We are not a subsidiary of Trump's interests. We are Canadians. We stand alone from the US. We have objectives pursued by the Pan-Canadian Framework to build a better Canada. We want easier perspectives for home buyers to save money, and access to a family doctor and the medical specialists that everyone in this country deserves. We want constant improvement. We're human. We realize that we haven't done the best we could be doing, and we want to step up and do better. And the only way for us to do that is with your trust.
Conservative Party.
You've spent the last 9-10 years or so looking at the failures of the Liberal Party. And the last thing you need from any other group is an extremely strong centralized government taking over every single thing that the Canadians want and need. What the Conservative Party offers is we offer this blend of listening to you and addressing all accesses in public and private. We want a better Canada made here in Canada. So before you select your vote, think to yourself, do I actually want to experience a change in my life? If yes, vote Conservative.
The NDP.
The NDP isn't a party that strives to work for just one type of Canadian. We strive to work for all types of Canadians, regardless of where they're from or who they believe in. We are a party who believes that every Canadian wishes and strives to improve the lives of every other citizen, and that is what the NDP stands for.
Next, the Greens.
Canada, we stand now at the precipice for change. We must lead the world towards a more sustainable future, not just for us, but for our future generations as well. That begins with championing foreign alliances that uphold democracy, that maintain environmental stewardship, and by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. By also stopping private corporation encroachment that other forms of government have already allowed in Canada into the housing market and the healthcare sector, we can ensure not only a more sustainable future, but a more affordable one as well. The time to act for a brighter and greener Canadian future is now.
All right, and lastly, the Bloc Québécois.
Ladies and gentlemen, specifically my Quebec viewers listening in, tonight we've heard a lot of, we want to do this, we plan to do this. You know what Quebec's done? We've done that. We act as a champion in Canada with global trade partnerships, with the highest GDP within Canada that is rising exponentially compared to the other provinces. Acting as a province, we have created efficient healthcare systems, efficient clean energy, and we plan to expand this throughout Canada whilst giving power to the provinces in order to see what they do best. It's not listening to we want to do this, it's we have done this.
All right, and with that, we conclude our debate. Thank you for our candidates for your fascinating input, and we hope to see the public at the polls. Lastly, we would like to thank our audience and online viewers for your attention. And it's been a pleasure representing the CBC Radio Canada debate. Thank you very much.
Ciao, guys.